You know, it's a funny thing. We had quite a good little relationship. He rang me up one Christmas Day, I think it was, and I heard this. Hello?
He's very weird.
Paul McCartney's career is one of the most extraordinary in music history. From the explosion of Beatlemania in the 1960s to his decades as a solo artist and leader of Wings, McCartney has rarely stepped out of the spotlight. His catalog of songs is vast, his influence immeasurable, and his reputation largely one of warmth and optimism. Yet the internet loves a good controversy, and in recent years a rumor has spread that McCartney, now in his 80s, finally revealed a list of the 7 rock bands he hated the most. The idea is tantalizing. Imagine a Beatle, usually so diplomatic, suddenly going scorched earth on his peers. But like so many clickbait headlines, it collapses under scrutiny. McCartney never issued such a list. What he has done, though, is speak candidly about other musicians, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with envy, and occasionally with a sharp edge. This video takes those real comments and places them in context. Rather than hatred, we find a mix of competitiveness, disappointment, respect, and even regret. These moments paint a far more nuanced picture of McCartney, not as a man of grudges, but as one who isn't afraid to share what he thinks. Number 7. Phil Collins, Genesis. Sometimes the stories that make headlines aren't really about hatred at all. They're about misunderstandings. That's exactly the case with Paul McCartney and Phil Collins. The tale comes from Collins himself, who in 2002 attended a formal event at Buckingham Palace. As both men waited in line, Collins, then already a rock star in his own right thanks to Genesis and his solo career, asked McCartney for an autograph. McCartney's response was teasing rather than warm. Turning to then-wife Heather Mills, Paul reportedly quipped, "Oh, Heather, our little Phil's a bit of a Beatles fan." Collins didn't find it funny. In interviews years later, he described the exchange as condescending, saying he felt belittled by McCartney's tone. He even admitted to holding on to the irritation for a long time, replaying the remark in his mind. From his perspective, it wasn't banter, it was dismissal. McCartney, however, never intended it that way. When the story resurfaced in the press, he wrote Collins a note encouraging them to put the matter behind them. Rather than escalate the tension, he tried to smooth things over. Collins later acknowledged that he may have taken the remark too seriously, but by then, the tale had already become fodder for clickbait about McCartney's supposed hatred of Genesis. What's interesting here is how perception shapes reputation. McCartney, known for his cheeky humor, likely thought he was being playful. Collins, approaching him as both a colleague and lifelong fan, was hoping for warmth and camaraderie. The mismatch of tone created a lasting bruise. It also raises a bigger question. When does friendly teasing cross the line into insult? Rock stars, like anyone else, have egos and sensitivities, and what sounds like banter to one person can sting another for years. So here's something for you to think about. If you were in Collins' shoes, would you laugh it off as McCartney's dry humor, or would you feel slighted by the comment? In the end, this wasn't hatred, just a moment of crossed wires. McCartney moved on quickly, and Collins, after venting publicly, seemed to do the same. It's a reminder that sometimes the most viral feuds start with little more than a poorly timed joke. Number 6. Michael Jackson, Business Betrayal. Of all the stories that follow Paul McCartney, few sting as much as the one involving Michael Jackson. In the early 1980s, the two icons were friends and collaborators. They recorded tracks together, including the smash hit Say Say Say, and publicly praised each other's talents. Say, say, say. Their friendship seemed genuine, two of the biggest names in music bonding over creativity. But the relationship changed dramatically in 1985. That year, Jackson purchased ATV Music Publishing, which owned the rights to most of the Beatles' catalog. McCartney had previously advised Jackson to invest in publishing, explaining that owning songs is where the money is. Jackson took the advice to heart, so much so that when ATV came up for sale, he outbid everyone, including McCartney himself. To Paul, the move felt like betrayal. He later told Billboard, "It's like being someone's friend and then buying the rug they're standing on." In other interviews, he called the decision dodgy, and admitted he couldn't afford to buy back the very songs he had written with John Lennon. For McCartney, it wasn't just business, it was personal. The Beatles' catalog represented his life's work, and now it belonged to a collaborator he had trusted. Despite his anger, McCartney stopped short of outright hatred. He recognized Jackson's talent and influence, and he never indulged in open feuding. Instead, he framed the issue as a matter of principle. To him, the problem wasn't Michael as a person. It was the system that allowed such transactions to happen in the first place. Over time, the catalog changed hands again, eventually returning to a joint venture that gave McCartney more control. But the bitterness of that moment lingered in his story. Fans often cite it as an example of how even friendships in the music industry can be complicated by money and ownership. So here's a question for you. Was Jackson wrong to buy the catalog, or was he simply following good business advice, even if it hurt a friend? For McCartney, the answer was clear. Talent and creativity should always matter more than contracts and corporate deals. His disappointment in Jackson was real, but it was rooted in betrayal of trust, not hatred of the man. Number 5, Madonna. Competitive envy. Paul McCartney has always been candid about the competitive streak that comes with being one of the most successful musicians on the planet. Even decades after the Beatles, he admitted that he still found himself comparing his achievements to those of other artists. One of the few times he openly voiced envy was when he talked about Madonna. In interviews compiled by Far Out magazine, McCartney recalled feeling a touch of resentment during the early 1990s when Madonna's career was at its peak. She was selling out stadiums around the world, dominating the charts, and reinventing herself with each new album and tour.
And the best pop album is Ray of Light, Madonna.
To fans, she wasn't just a pop star. She was an icon, a goddess of music and culture. Watching her from a distance, McCartney confessed that it stung. "I was resentful," he admitted. "She was the goddess, and we were just the sorry people." It's a rare moment of vulnerability. Most of the time, McCartney brushed aside comparisons with other artists, confident in his legacy. But seeing Madonna command global attention reminded him that music is not only about songs, it's about spectacle, reinvention, and cultural presence. In her ability to capture the world's imagination, she rivaled even the Beatles' dominance of the 1960s. Still, McCartney never framed his feelings as hatred. Instead, he chalked it up to natural competitiveness. If you're in any way competitive, it's what you do. You look at the charts, see what they've sold. Well, let's try and sell some more. His comments revealed both admiration and professional drive. Madonna's success didn't diminish his. It pushed him to measure himself against the very best. This honesty also makes McCartney more relatable. Even legends feel the sting of comparison when someone else seems to capture the world's attention. It's a reminder that competitiveness, when tempered with respect, can be a powerful motivator rather than a destructive force. So let me ask you, if you were Paul, would you feel jealousy watching Madonna sell out arenas? Or would you simply admire her ability to stay at the top? For McCartney, the answer was both. His envy was real, but so was his respect. Madonna represented not a rival to be hated, but a peer whose brilliance reminded him why the race for musical relevance never truly ends. Number 4, Led Zeppelin, high praise for hard rock. If you believe the clickbait lists, you might think Paul McCartney had little patience for Led Zeppelin. In reality, the opposite is true. He admired them. While Zeppelin's rise in the late 1960s and 1970s came after the Beatles had set the stage, McCartney always gave credit where it was due. In a 1976 interview with Sounds magazine, he made it clear, "I like Pink Floyd, I like Led Zeppelin, I like the Rolling Stones." He wasn't shy about including Zeppelin among the bands he respected. Unlike some critics who dismissed heavy rock as crude, McCartney saw the energy and cohesion behind Zeppelin's music. He went to see them live and praised their performances, noting that they do a good show because they have the thing together as a band. They've got absolute confidence in each other. That comment reveals how McCartney measured great groups. It wasn't just about riffs or hits, it was about trust. Zeppelin's chemistry on stage reminded him of the Beatles at their peak. Four musicians so in sync that they could take risks without losing their balance. His admiration extended to individuals too. McCartney called drummer John Bonham a good friend and even ranked him as the second best drummer of all time, behind only his former bandmate Ringo Starr. It's a striking compliment, showing how much respect he had for Bonham's power and precision. What's fascinating is that McCartney, often associated with melodic pop, could appreciate the raw force of hard rock. It demonstrates his openness to different genres and his recognition that rock's evolution didn't end with the Beatles. Rather than dismiss Zeppelin as imitators, he acknowledged them as innovators in their own right. So here's a thought for you. Do you think the Beatles would have thrived in the Zeppelin-dominated 1970s? Or would they have seemed out of step with the era's heavier sound? For McCartney, the answer was simple. Good music is good music. Led Zeppelin may have pushed rock into harder, louder territory, but Paul saw in them the same qualities that made his own band great: talent, unity, and the courage to take risks on stage. Number 3, Oasis. They're derivative. Few bands have invited comparisons to the Beatles as boldly as Oasis. In the mid-1990s, during the height of Britpop, brothers Noel and Liam Gallagher repeatedly declared their group to be heirs to the Beatles' throne. They even claimed they would one day be bigger than the Beatles. For Paul McCartney, the bravado was hard to ignore. At first, McCartney played along. In interviews, he wished Oasis luck, and admitted that hearing younger bands channel Beatles influences was flattering. But his tone shifted after the Gallaghers began insulting the Beatles publicly. By 1997, McCartney told reporters the band was derivative and think too much of themselves. He added bluntly, "They mean nothing to me." His critique wasn't about their musicianship, it was about their arrogance. He also offered a warning. Speaking to Q magazine, McCartney said Oasis had made the biggest mistake by claiming to surpass the Beatles. The boast, he argued, put a target on their backs and invited comparisons they could never live up to. Even if they had talent, the hype set them up for failure. Years later, McCartney softened his view. On Howard Stern's radio show, he explained that he hadn't originally bad-mouthed Oasis at all. He wished them well until their Beatles comments pushed him to respond. More recently, he even encouraged the Gallagher brothers to reunite, calling them pretty cool guys. The criticism mellowed into a kind of affectionate rivalry. This episode shows McCartney's competitive side. He wasn't threatened by Oasis musically. By the 1990s, his legacy was secure. But he bristled at the arrogance of a younger band dismissing the Beatles. For him, it wasn't about ego, it was about respect. So here's a question for you. Do you think Oasis's swagger was a harmless publicity stunt, or did it genuinely undermine their legacy by making them look arrogant? For McCartney, the answer leaned toward the latter. He saw confidence as fine, but he drew the line at dismissing history. Oasis may have borrowed from the Beatles' sound, but McCartney reminded the world that being derivative is no substitute for being truly original. Number 2, the Beach Boys. Admiration, not animosity. One of the strangest myths floating around online is that Paul McCartney disliked the Beach Boys. In reality, the truth is almost the complete opposite. Few bands earned McCartney's admiration as much as Brian Wilson and his California crew. The connection goes back to the mid-1960s, when the Beatles and the Beach Boys were locked in a kind of friendly arms race. Wilson's Pet Sounds directly inspired the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and McCartney has always been open about how deeply it moved him.
Are there any inspirations, like other bands that you would listen to for harmonies besides the Everly Brothers?
Beach Boys, I think, was big. Pet Sounds, I thought, right, we've got to do something better than that.
He called God Only Knows one of the most beautiful songs ever written, admitting that it reduces him to tears every time he hears it. In interviews with Far Out magazine, he even described the track as proof of Wilson's genius. McCartney once told the story of performing God Only Knows alongside Wilson. During rehearsal, Paul said he broke down in tears at soundcheck, overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the song. For someone who has played to millions, that vulnerability shows just how profound the piece was for him. Rather than rivalry, there was mutual respect. McCartney admired Wilson's intricate arrangements and emotional depth, while Wilson often spoke about how the Beatles pushed him to reach higher. Their competition wasn't about tearing each other down, it was about pushing the boundaries of what pop music could achieve. That's why it's baffling to see the Beach Boys included on McCartney hate lists. The reality is that Paul never had a bad word for them. If anything, he repeatedly emphasized how much he valued their work. So here's the question. Do you think the Beatles would have made Sgt. Pepper without the challenge posed by Pet Sounds? Or was that album Rivalry the very thing that elevated both bands to greatness? For McCartney, the answer was clear. The Beach Boys weren't a band to be dismissed. They were one of the few groups he saw as true equals in creativity. His admiration wasn't grudging, it was heartfelt. Number 1, the Rolling Stones. Friendly rivalry. Of all the so-called feuds Paul McCartney has been linked to, none attracts more attention than his playful rivalry with the Rolling Stones. The two bands rose to prominence in the 1960s, shared audiences, and even shared songs. John Lennon and McCartney wrote "I Want to Be Your Man" for the Stones in 1963. Yet, more than half a century later, Paul still can't resist teasing his old contemporaries. In a 2021 interview with The New Yorker, McCartney sparked headlines by calling the Stones a blues cover band. He quickly added, "I'm not sure I should say it," but the remark stuck. He contrasted the Beatles' broader stylistic reach, dabbling in everything from Indian raga to avant-garde experiments, with the Stones' more focused devotion to blues-based rock. It was a boast wrapped in a jab, the kind of comment guaranteed to light up the press. But McCartney didn't stop there. In the same breath, he emphasized his admiration. The Stones are a fantastic group. I go and see them every time they come out. I love them. The comment reveals the balance he always struck. Proud of the Beatles' accomplishments, but unwilling to deny the Stones their greatness. The Stones, for their part, took the ribbing in stride. Mick Jagger has often volleyed back playful digs, once joking on stage that the Beatles were a blues cover band too, just a different kind. Their banter never escalated into true hostility because beneath the teasing lay decades of mutual respect. This rivalry is less about dislike and more about pride. McCartney enjoys reminding the world that the Beatles stretched the boundaries of popular music while the Stones carved their own lane and ruled it with swagger. Far from bitterness, the relationship resembles two old athletes who once shared the same field, competitive but deeply respectful. So, what do you think? Was McCartney being cheeky when he called the Stones a blues band? Or was he right to draw a line between their focused style and the Beatles' broader canvas? For Paul, the comment was never about tearing them down. It was about celebrating the difference. Friendly rivalry kept both bands sharp, and even now, it keeps fans debating who truly ruled the 1960s. When you strip away the clickbait, Paul McCartney's record is clear. He never kept a secret blacklist of hated bands. What he did was something more human. He spoke his mind. Sometimes that meant a teasing jab, like calling the Rolling Stones a blues cover band. Sometimes it meant open admiration, as with his praise for the Beach Boys and Led Zeppelin. Other times it meant acknowledging envy, as he did with Madonna, or disappointment, as in his fractured friendship with Michael Jackson. And occasionally it was a simple misunderstanding, like the awkward moment with Phil Collins. Even his sharpest critiques, such as calling Oasis derivative, were grounded in pride, competitiveness, and a demand for originality. McCartney's comments rarely stem from bitterness. Instead, they reveal a man deeply protective of music's integrity and honest about his own insecurities. Far from a list of grudges, his remarks sketch the portrait of an artist who admires excellence, resents arrogance, and isn't afraid to admit when someone else's success stings. So here's the question for you. Which of McCartney's views do you think was the most justified? His playful rivalry with the Stones? His disappointment with Michael Jackson's business deal? Or his envy watching Madonna rule the charts? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear which of these stories surprised you most, and whether you think McCartney's honesty makes him more relatable. Because in the end, Paul McCartney's story isn't about hate. It's about respect, competition, and the unshakable belief that music deserves both honesty and heart.